Welcome back to another chapter of Charlotte's Web. Chapter 17, Uncle. When they pulled into the fairgrounds, they could hear music and see the Ferris wheel turning in the sky. They could smell the dust of the racetrack where the sprinkling cart had moistened it, and they could smell hamburgers frying and see balloons afloat. They could hear sheep baying in their pens. An enormous voice over the loudspeaker said, "Attention, please. Will the owner of a Pontiac car, license plate number H2439, move your car away from the fireworks shed?" "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "Can I too?" asked Avery. "I'm going to win a doll by spinning a wheel, and it will stop at the right number," said Fern. "I'm going to steer a jet plane and make it bump into another one." "Can I have a balloon?" asked Fern. "Can I have a frozen custard and a cheeseburger and a raspberry soda pop?" asked Avery. "You children be quiet till we get the pig unloaded," said Mrs. Arable. "Let's let the children go off by themselves," suggested Mr. Arable. "The fair only comes once a year." Mr. Arable gave Fern 2 quarters and 2 dimes. He gave Avery 5 dimes and 4 nickels. "Now run along," he said, "and remember, the money has to last all day. Don't spend it in the first few minutes. And be back here at the truck at noontime so we can all have lunch together. And don't eat a lot of stuff that's going to make you sick to your stomachs. And if you go on those swings," said Miss Arable, "hang on tight. You hang on very tight. Do you hear me?" "And don't get lost," said Mr. Zuckerman. "And don't get dirty." "Don't get overheated," said their mother. "Watch out for pickpockets," said their father. "And don't cross the racetrack when the horses are coming," said Mrs. Zuckerman. The children grabbed each other by the hands and danced off in the direction of the merry-go-round, toward the wonderful music and the wonderful adventure and the wonderful excitement, into the wonderful midway where there would be no parents to guard them or guide them, where they could be happy and free and do as they pleased. Mrs. Arable stood quietly and watched them go. Then she sighed. Then she blew her nose. "Do you really think it's all right?" she said. "Well, they've got to grow up sometime," said Mr. Arable, "and the fair is a good place to start, I guess." There they are, going off to the fair. While Wilbur was being unloaded and taken out of his crate into his new pig pen, crowds gathered to watch. They stared at the sign, "Zuckerman's Famous Pig." Wilbur stared back and tried to look extra good. He was pleased with his new home. The pen was grassy, and it was shaded from the sun by a shed roof. Charlotte, watching her chance, scrambled out of the crate and climbed a post under the side of the roof. Nobody noticed her. Templeton, not wishing to come out in broad daylight, stayed quiet under the straw at the bottom of the crate. Mr. Zuckerman poured some skim milk into Wilbur's trough, pitched clean straw into his pen, and then he and Mrs. Zuckerman and the Arables walked down towards the cattle barn to look at the purebred cows and to see the sights. Mr. Zuckerman particularly wanted to look at the tractors. Mrs. Zuckerman wanted to see a deep freeze. Lurvy wandered off by himself, hoping to meet friends and have some fun on the midway. As soon as the people were gone, Charlotte spoke to Wilbur. "It's a good thing that you can't see what I see," she said. "What do you see?" asked Wilbur. "There's a pig in the next pen, and he's enormous. I'm afraid he is much bigger than you are." "Well, maybe he's older than I am and has more time to grow." Tears began to come to his eyes. "I'll drop down and have a closer look," said Charlotte. Then she crawled along the beam till she was directly over the next pen. Then she let herself down on a drag line and hung in the air just in front of the pig's snout. "May I have your name?" she asked politely. The pig stared at her. "No name," he said in a big voice. "Just call me Uncle." "Very well, Uncle," replied Charlotte. "What is the date of your birth? Are you a spring pig?"
"Sure, I'm a spring pig. What did you think I was, a spring chicken? Ha ha! That's a good one, huh, sister?"
"Mildly funny," said Charlotte. "I've heard funnier ones, though. Well, glad to have met you. Now I must be going."
There's Charlotte talking to that big old pig.
She ascended slowly and returned to Wilbur's pen. He claims he's a spring pig, said Charlotte. Perhaps he is. One thing is certain, he has the most unattractive personality. He's too familiar, too noisy. He cracks weak jokes. Also, he's not anywhere near as clean as you are, nor as pleasant. I took quite a dislike to him in our brief interview. He's going to be a hard pig to beat, though, Wilbur, on account of his size and weight. But with me helping you, it can be done. When are you going to spin a web? Asked Wilbur. This afternoon, late, if I'm not too tired, said Charlotte. At least, the least thing tires me these days. I don't have the energy I once had. I guess it's my age. Wilbur looked at his friend. She looked rather swollen and seemed listless. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte, he said. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll feel better. Perhaps, she said wearily, but I feel like the end of a long day. Clinging upside down to the ceiling, she settled down for a nap, leaving Wilbur very much worried. All morning, people wandered past Wilbur's pens. Dozens and dozens of strangers stopped to stare at him and admire his silky white coat, his curly tail, and his kind and radiant expression. Then they would move on to the next pen where the bigger pig lay. Wilbur heard several people make favorable remarks about Uncle's great size. He couldn't help overhearing these remarks, and he couldn't help worrying. And now, with Charlotte not feeling well, he thought, oh dear. All morning, Templeton lay asleep under the straw. The day grew fiercely hot. At noon, the Zuckermans and the Arables returned to the pig pen. Then, a few minutes later, Fern and Avery showed up. Avery had a monkey doll in her arms and was eating Cracker Jacks. Avery had a balloon tied to his ear and was chewing on a candied apple. The children were hot and dirty. Isn't it hot? Said Mrs. Zuckerman. It's terribly hot, said Mr. Zuckerman. One by one, they climbed into the truck and opened their lunch boxes. The sun beat down on everything. Nobody seemed hungry. When are the judges going to decide about Wilbur? Asked Mrs. Zuckerman. Not till tomorrow, said Mr. Zuckerman. Lurvy appeared, carrying an Indian blanket that he had won. That's just what we need, said Avery. A blanket. Of course it is, said Lurvy. He spread the blanket across the sideboards of the truck so that it was like a little tent. The children sat in the shade under the blanket and felt better. After lunch, they stretched out and fell asleep. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 17.